systems that we're trying to automate. So back in the early days of PowerShell, Jeffrey was running around shouting, "Coverage is king," which basically means the more commandlets we get, the more systems we can talk to, and everyone's happy. So now the last couple of years, there's been this explosion of web services, which, if we tap into them, really kind of explodes our coverage of what we can do. So I'm here to talk about that. A lot of products are using this model. Windows Azure does it, Citrix NetScalers, and a lot of products have this REST service, and then they build a .NET SDK around that, and then on top of that, they package PowerShell commandlets, or a set of PowerShell commandlets, a module. So why would you step to the left? If there is a PowerShell module, why would you use the .NET SDK or the REST service? Well, in some cases, the PowerShell commandlets are really low quality. And I want to again thank the Citrix PBS team for constantly supplying a good example of a shitty commercial PowerShell. It's always nice to have an example of that. And in other cases, it just lacks functionality. Like Windows Azure has, they always implement functionality first in the REST API, and then it's moved to the .NET SDK. So you can usually do a lot more with the REST API than you can with the .NET and the PowerShell commands. And that's just how it is with the cloud and how fast everything's moving. So that's basically my introduction. So let's get into the gritty stuff. So as far as web services go, we usually group them into two. I call it Generation 1 web services or SOAP services. These are like the old school, your grandfather's web service in a way. They talk XML, and the reason why we don't use them that much anymore is that on the internet, these guys are slow. They talk XML, and they just, I don't know, they're just slow. We have there's a lot of products still using them now. SQL Server reporting services, for instance, if you're pushing a report to SQL Server, that's a SOAP server that you need. So they're still around, but like the new cool startups will generally not use SOAP services. They will use RESTful services. RESTful services it's not a product, it's just a way of implementing a web service, more or less. And I've included, fully expecting you guys to take notes or write down. I've included, these guys are kind of listing the differences in a much better way than I'm able to up here. But yeah, so let's look at SOAP services quickly first. So on a SOAP service, you basically connect to the SOAP service, and then, as far as PowerShell goes, it will generate a proxy that lets you talk to that service in an effective way. You can still call XML directly if you want to, but there's really not a good reason to. Whereas REST services, on the other hand, have, like, each method you want to do has a URL. So in my example, if I want to look at Fred's orders, the URL would like be customers Fred orders. And then you use the HTTP method to indicate what you want to do. So you can use the HTTP get to get stuff, and if you want to create something, you typically use HTTP post. And yeah, so basically HTTP delete to products orange will delete all your oranges. So you don't call methods, you call URLs basically. Yeah, so let me. I'm going to switch between presenting and demos, and I think I might be running over time. So I'll just keep talking until someone kicks me.
Not yet.
So, if you guys are able to see that, no, you're not, because I need to do this. There you go. I just Googled SOAP, and the first thing I found was something from weather.gov that apparently lets you list city names, which is about as exciting as it gets. But it serves as a good example. So this is the URL for the web service I found. So if I want to talk to this web service from PowerShell, I use the new web service proxy commandlet, and then I need to store the result of that in the variable. So I say so proxy equals new service proxy, and then just hit the URL. So what I get back from that is, oh wow, internet actually worked. So what I get back from that is an auto-generated object or type, which contains the method that web service exposes. So you can call getMember, and then some here somewhere, like city names. That was the one I wanted to get. So that's a method, right? So you call methods on that object to work with it. So here I can say city names equals so proxy lateral city names, and then it takes a string. They call it detail. I don't know what it does, but and then SOAP is always XML, so I know that what I'm getting back is an XML. So if I just run that, see that, yeah, I seem to be getting some city names, shockingly enough. And then I can just create a little array for that, and then I can say, give me cities in Washington. And I only got 2, which is, yeah, I don't know why. It's probably something to do with the detail. So SOAP services are really easy to work with, but they're ineffective compared to REST services. And they always talk XML. So that's SOAP. Any questions?
Why do you say ineffective?
Well, first and foremost, XML is a lot slower than JSON. A JSON request will generally be 4 times lighter on the wire than XML does. And I found a blog post that said it's slower, so I'm just assuming it is. We can just kind of do this, actually. So authentication is kind of important when we're dealing with web. HTTP requests, there's a lot of or different ways you can interact with HTTP in an authenticated way. Some services will just say, do whatever you want, like the one I showed you, or they use some kind of IP-based filter. So maybe you go into a GUI and say, these are the IP addresses that I allow to talk with my service. And then you have like the standard basic MTLM, where you send the username and password with every request. And then you have these new kind of authentication methods, which are token-based. And what you do there is you authenticate with your username and password once, and you get a token back. And that token is what you use to authenticate yourself on every request. So I have a quick demo where I just show some authentication stuff as well. So invoke web request is like the standard PowerShell way of just saying, give me web. So I got web. So what I get back is an object with content, which is like the HTML content, and then a raw content, which includes some more stuff, and then some other things here. Now, if I do the same, this is for you, Jeffrey. If I do the same with HTTPS, this is a non-trusted certificate. So again, error, although I told it to silently continue. So invoke web request generally doesn't behave correctly if you pass the error action. So you need to wrap stuff in a try catch block if you want to do proper error handling. Some web requests actually they will pretend to send you an error when they send you a token back. So although it says 401, you're not authenticated, you actually get a token back that you use. So that's a huge problem in terms of PowerShell. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to ignore non-trusted certificates?
Yes, there is. I'm glad you asked. So there's no way in PowerShell to ignore it, but there is a way in .NET to ignore it. So I have my little disable cert check file here. And what that does, it basically sets up a certificate policy on .NET Framework, which PowerShell, or for the run space, so it only lasts for the PowerShell session. So if I run this guy, let's see, I could probably just run it from here, right? And then do the same again. It shouldn't show company. No, I got the same thing. So that's the way to do it. And if you look at some of the posts from around the SMA, System Center SMA stuff, this is the method they use to kind of avoid throwing errors when you don't have a trusted certificate. So yeah. So in terms of authentication, let me just quickly build a credential object here, and then again you can invoke web request with a credential, and that takes a standard PowerShell credential object. So it's pretty easy to work with. Does anyone know what happens when you kind of call a web something with a credential object? No, shocking. So PowerShell will actually send two requests. It will send a first request unauthenticated, and then the web server responds with a 401, says you're not authenticated, but I will let you authenticate with these and these methods. So if you've seen in IIS, you can set it up to either support basic or integrated or whatever. That's how the web server tells the client which of those authentication methods it's able to use. And then once PowerShell gets that back, it knows, okay, I'm supposed to use basic here. So now it'll send a new request to the same URL with the username and password. So generally that's not a huge problem, but some web services, they require you to send an authentication header on the first request. So they won't reply with authenticate. They will just say, sorry, you're not getting in. And at that point, PowerShell will show. They won't do anything. So the way to get around that is to construct your. Can you see in the back there? Is that okay? Okay, good. So the way to get around that is to manually construct the authentication header yourself. So an authentication header is basically your username and password with a colon in between. Do you guys call it colon? Like 2 dots? Colonoscopy? So you take that string and then you base64 encode it. And then, so for me, administrator, colon, password 123, your base64 encoded is this string that I've highlighted here. So if I do this and just send it the header, then I should be able to get in. Or not. Or yes. And then if you're on a earlier version of PowerShell than version 3, if you're on PowerShell version 2, you'll have to use system.net.web client instead, because they involve web and REST methods are not present. So that's fully okay too. Any questions there? No, good. Visual Studio Light Switch is one of the products I was planning to just almost jump over it, but then I heard someone talking yesterday that they were actually using this. I blogged about this 2 years ago. We were building our IP address management solution using LightSwitch. And what the LightSwitch team says, it's a good, like, rapid development for data-driven application, especially if you have relational data that you need to, like, quickly visualize, so forms, new user onboarding. This sir is using it for his server deployment so that junior admins can go to this nice little form and type in server names, and then PowerShell handles the server build. So that's one way of doing it. So I've just clicked new project, and I've selected a LightSwitch project in this example. And I'm no developer, so there's absolutely no code required here. So it says start with data, so I'm gonna build a reporting service for database servers. So that means that I need server name. That's a string, so that's good. And then I need a table for my instance, which is probably instance name. And then let's see, DB server version or something. No, that's version. And then you can quickly add relationships between them. So from instance to server. So a server will have many instances, right? So many to one, blah, blah, blah. So it's really simple to work with. And then if I start this guy, oh no, I forgot to add a UI. A lot of people like UIs. So that will just say, you got nothing. So let me just quickly add a screen here. So, servers, and what data do you want to work with? Servers, and I want to see my instances as well. How many saw Tom's session on OData yesterday? Yeah, so the backend for LightSwitch data is OData. It's a RESTful OData service. So the interesting stuff here is that we can have some users talk to the service via its GUI, and then we can also script against it using PowerShell directly towards the REST service. So I'm just going to quickly add a server 1, and then, oh no, I didn't build an instance GUI. But, so it's that simple. You just click around the GUI, and then stuff happens. I have, shockingly enough, published one, and it's running on Azure right now, so that's why I'm a bit worried about bandwidth here. So no Netflixing, you guys. On a LightSwitch service, let's see if I can make this a bit bigger now. There is, the OData endpoint is always application data, so that's let's see. So if I hit that and pray, there we go. And then I can do servers. And then there's my one server. Now, this endpoint is really, I found it complex to work with using REST methods. Now, luckily enough, Visual Studio is able to help us making it a little bit easier. So what I can do is that I can create, promise, I'm not going to code a single line. Just going to say class. What I can do here, if you just fire up our class project and add a service reference and type in that thing, then Visual Studio grabs the metadata document of that OData service, and then is able to construct objects for us. So instead of talking directly with the web service, we can talk to a .NET object that kind of has all the methods and classes and everything we need. So you deploy the app, You can use it, you do it in a GUI, and then maybe you get some developer to help you do validation or whatever you need afterwards. Deploy it somewhere, and then generate the proxy DLL, which will be generated when I hit build. And then you use that proxy DLL in your PowerShell code. That DLL, you can inspect it using Visual Studio or ISI if you want to, just to see what the names of the objects are called. So I have a demo from that as well. So this is hopefully a working copy of that proxy DLL that talks to my service in Azure. So I just add it first. You add the DLL thingy, and then you call it or you invoke it with the URL of the data service, and that's pretty much all you need. Now this is non-authenticated. It also supports authenticated traffic if you only get saved. So at this point, I can say service. They told me to never type at a download, but I just use this. So if I look here, I have my servers classes, and I have my instances, and I have my databases. And I also have a ton of helper classes for saving stuff. I have a service format where I can tell it to speak, or to send XML or JSON objects. So since we are on a low bandwidth thing here, I'm going to call it use JSON. Like that. And then JSON instead of XML files are what's being transported between my client and the web server when I talk to it. So from this point on, I can simply, if I want to add a server, I first say I want a new object, and that object is a server. And then I tell it what name I want. And then I call the add to servers method, which is a method on that service. And then I call save changes. And then if all is good, oh, save your well, it's getting wet. Cool. So I have a VM running with a couple of instances on it. So I'm just gonna set up a PowerShell session for that, and then so my idea was that if you have like thousands of servers with millions of instances, you can instead of looking for instances of databases manually, you can have all that in a type of CMD. Geeky little demo idea. So what I'm doing here, I'm just simply sending a script log to my database server, and I've already deployed a DLL, and it also needs a helper DLL. Depending on what's in your GAC, you might have to add those manually. But if you try and load a DLL in PowerShell and it has a dependency which is not loaded, it will tell you. You get a loader exception, so you can actually figure out what DLLs you're missing. So it shouldn't be too hard. And then also, instead of these long thingies here, I'm using type accelerators to simply add server instance database, so that I can say new object server. And I don't know if you saw James O'Neill's talk yesterday, but you kind of want to help users, so you can put that as an accelerator in your module, and then the user is able to just hit server instead of having to remember that awfully long thing. So what this code does is simply it first checks that the server name is added, and then it lists its instances, and then it goes in and lists the databases and add those terms. So if I run this on a good sunny day, this will work. So let's see what happens. server name, so these are the instances. If I get into instances, I can save the databases and which ones. So you can search it. You get a lot of stuff for free. So for me, I mean, I see a lot of blog posts with people formatting HTML in PowerShell. For me, this is a lot easier way of getting stuff into web than formatting HTML. So, but that's just me. You might feel weird. So that's Visual Studio Light Switch. Any questions? It's a fun little thing to work with, and it doesn't require you to be able to code. So it's fun to play with at least. Setting up Visual Studio on IIS is probably the hardest part. There's some dependencies there, but the Light Switch team has some blog posts on how to properly set up IIS to host Light Switch project. So JSON. How many have worked with JSON or seen it or know what it? Yeah. Okay. So it could be so you know that after you work with JSON, working with XML seems like it feels like a Japanese toilet. There's all these switches, and you want to do one thing. That's all you want to do. And also it's a lot easier on the wire. So I guess that's why it became popular now that we have so many devices talking to web services. You need to be light on the wire. So as far as PowerShell goes, there is a convert to and from JSON, which takes any type of object and converts it to a JSON string. And you can also convert it back. So the way we interact with these services are basically we construct objects, convert them to JSON, send that JSON to some REST interface, some web service, and then we get stuff back and then we rinse repeat. So I think I have some stuff on that too. So here, I'm simply saying get service or get the first 10 of them. And if I pipe that to convert to JSON, so this is a JSON string. It's pretty simple. These brackets here indicate an array, and then this is each object. And you can go back and forth. There is a limitation on the JSON parser in PowerShell. It chokes at files larger than about 2 megabytes. But you can use the JavaScript serializer instead. So on that one, you're able to set the max length of the JSON file. So here I'm just basically setting it to the length of the JSON file that I'm pushing through. Just simple and easy, so it'll never choke. And if you use this guy as well, you get the ability to tell the parser how many levels down it should parse. So if you have a lot of nested objects, you may only want to parse like the upper 3 of them. So it gives you a bit more options. I'm assuming this doesn't work on server core though. It's probably something to do with
so we don't have support for that level in cloud?
No.
That should be
Talk to this guy.
That should be there.
Yeah, it cuts off the end of us.
Yeah, it would be nice to have some more options around that. Yeah, definitely.
JSON is getting more and more popular, especially with Azure.
Yeah, definitely.
Resource manager and stuff.
I completely agree. So I'm assuming it's coming. I'll just assume it. I'll just assume it.
Jeffrey's taking notes.
Yeah. So when you talk to REST via JSON, there's a couple of gotchas. First and foremost, everything's a PS custom object, right? So there's no, or you can call get type, you'll only get custom object. So there's no proper typing. And also when you call these services, like we talked about, I think it was yesterday, each request is atomic. You authenticate yourself at each request, and what you get back is atomic. So there's really no state, because on a mobile device, you can go offline at any time. And inside of here, you drop out of connection from the time. Another thing, APIs you find on the web often use curl as an example. Curl is Like it's like an invoke web request executable that's available both on Linux and on Windows. So if you go to, so this is the Twilio SMS API. Say this is how they describe how to use their service. This is a curl, blah blah blah. There's actually an online service called Hurlit, which is curled on the web. So you can just hurl it. Now, curl. If you give curl a username and password, it will never wait for, or it would always pass that credential on its first request. So remember, PowerShell kind of expects the web server to reply back and say you need to authenticate, and then it sends it to user. Whereas curl will always send the username and password on the first request out. So there's some subtle differences between how invoke web request works and how curl works. So it's nice to be aware of them when you work with these services that use curl as an example. And then JSON itself, like I said, you'll often find yourself ending up with a lot of nested objects. And if you want to create those, if you want to create the object and then convert it to JSON, I often find myself just using here strings and then just using text replace. So if you have like 50 lines of JSON, it's just, I can't be bothered like constructing proper objects for it and then converting it. So I'm just using text replace. I'm lazy. Now about this custom objects, there's a really nice piece of code called ustruct, which enables you to really easily construct proper objects for whatever you need. So hopefully I have time for that example. But so what I do is that I talk to web service, I get the JSON back, I convert it to a custom object, and then from that custom object, I will create like proper objects that are named so that I can say type and stuff like that. I'll show that. Let's see what more do we have here. Yeah, so my other main demo is around ASP.NET MVC Web API. Now this is a pretty huge deal. It is Microsoft's it's a web app framework for building stuff. So it has both GUI and there's also a REST service that you can use. It was at least partially invented by Scott Guthrie, which is now he's I guess he's head of Windows Azure among other things. So he's the ASP.NET.
And server and dev.
Yeah. See your boss?
Yeah.
Oh. He's the guy with the red shirt. So among other things, it's a flexible framework for building RESTful web services. Now, contrary to Visual Studio Lightswitch, this will require you to do some coding, but it's super popular. So pretty much whatever you want to do inside of MVC, there's a blog post and a video for it. So even though you're not a really hell-bent developer, you'll still be able to do fun stuff with it. As far as I know, don't be too surprised if maybe the DSC full server gets implemented in MVC Web API at some point. We wouldn't be too surprised. It's not safe. So this guy natively supports both JSON and XML. At this point, I don't see any reason to not to use JSON. It's just a lot faster. But if you have things already natively talking XML, you might want to still hold on to that. So let me show you a bit what this guy is about.
By the way, convert to JSON does support depth.
Support
depth.
Oh, maybe it does. Maybe it's just the length thing it doesn't support. So this is, no, it's not. It is not. This, however, this is the MVC. So I built a simple framework, or a simple platform. It has a couple of GUI pages and a couple of REST service controllers, as they're called. And again, I've taken my example of database servers, instances, and databases. So what I have not done is to put any links in here. But if I do servers on a good day, yeah. So I can hit new server for operating systems, OS. And then it's there, and then I can delete it. Now, again, this is the REST stuff, right? I don't know if you can see the URL. I'm saying servers, delete, and then the ID of the server. So there's no object or method calling here. It's just I'm hitting the URL to tell it what I want to do. So that's how it works. Now, from a PowerShell perspective, I can do. So this is the URL of my instances. So this might. Let's do this first. So this is what I'm getting back. So the difference between invoke REST method and invoke web request. Now web request just gives me back the full result of whatever the web service sent me. Invoke REST method does exactly the same. It just takes the content and tries to convert it to JSON or XML. That's pretty much all it does. So if you look at the parameters, they're exactly the same. So I could do invoke web method and say, and take the content of that object I get back and convert it to JSON and end up with the exact same. So if I would like to, let's see, when you build stuff inside of MVC, or when you build APIs inside of MVC, it automatically generates like a help file that lists all your endpoints. So here you can see I can say get databases, I can say get databases with an ID, or delete. So that's pretty nice that it auto-generates the help, which PowerShell has. So if I want to register a user, I can do that here. So I basically, I can show the helper first. Register. So this is the content that that the web API expects me to send to it when I register a user. So I can basically just create a custom object and convert it to JSON like that. So if that looks like pretty much what I need. And then I basically hit that URL with my JSON payload in the body, and the user is registered. So if I want to log into this thing, you can control on a per controller or API basis whether or not you require an authenticated session or that anyone can do it. So if you want to authenticate against this thing, it uses tokens. So you hit it first with your username and password, and then you get a token back, and then that token is what you'll use in each request to tell it who you are. So I'm saying that I would like a token, and my username is this node, and my password is password123. And then I get back an access token. So if I try this guy out, first can I just call it unauthenticated, which says not available. But if I add authentication headers, which is basically token type and my access token that I already got from the same web service, then it lets me. Questions so far? Yeah.
Are you gonna share these examples somewhere?
I can post everything. Just post my C drive.
Cool.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's it.
Whatever about.
So what I wanted to do, like as a sum up, was to try and take this stuff and create like a semi working module. I wouldn't send this module to James O'Neill. He would probably kick me. But just to kind of show. Let's see, modules, and it's called something like this. So, like I said, these REST requests are atomic, right? There's no session state. So one thing you might want to do when you're kind of developing these modules is to kind of fake some kind of session state so that the user can connect and then not care about his connection after that. So let's just go ahead and so let's just show this module first, so I can just import it, and then I'll just take my same credential, just build up this. And now getDB server is one of the functions in that module. And if I call that, I say you need to connect to this. All right, good. So I call connect server DB with my credential and the URL of the web API. And then once that's done, I'm connected. Now, as far as the HTTP traffic goes, there's no connection state, but from a PowerShell perspective, I'm connected. So the user doesn't have to worry about that anymore. So now I can call getDB server. Servers. Another thing I do is that I use the new struct to convert those PS custom objects into proper objects. So I'm calling them server database instance. And that gives me the ability to do piping, because I know what objects I'm sending into my commandlets. So I can do instance is servers 0 pipe to getDB server instance. And then I have my instance. So there it is. And if I do instance the type, that's an instance. So that's, I guess, the way we should work with web requests, that we try and kind of hide some of the shortcomings or some of the hard to do stuff from the user, so that they can have like an effective experience. So what I'm doing, if I look at this module, if you let's see, so this is my getDB server. So what I do is whenever someone hits this commandlet or this function, I first check that I have some parameters that are filled, and these will get filled when you call that connectDB server function. So if these are empty, then I know it's not connected. And I define these inside the module, so they're invisible from the user's PowerShell session. They only exist inside the module. And also, when you do connect server DB, I first hit the URL without authentication, just to see that it's alive, because I want to know that this endpoint exists before I start sending credentials at it. And for MVC, I know that I should get back an unsupported grant type if I just did it unauthenticated. So I test that first, and if everything's good and the web server is alive, then I start doing the authentication stuff that I already showed. And then I fill these guys here, and the rest of it works. I wanted to show the struct functionality as well, that enables me to do get type and get server back, but I'm out of time, unfortunately. Jeffrey's looking at his watch, and I guess that's my cue to wrap it up. Any questions?
Go, go, go.
Well, the doors aren't open yet. What the hell? Yeah, Trevor told me to show how you can do REST calls against Windows Azure as well. So I'm going to do that quickly. The Windows Azure service is quite similar. It takes a subscription ID, and it also, authentication in Azure is always your certificate, right? You have these management certificates. So you need to send your subscription ID and your certificate thumbprint to the REST service. That's how you authenticate. And there's a lot of functionality inside those REST methods that are not available yet in the commandlets. So on a rainy day, you might want to check out the REST documentation on Windows Azure just to see what's there. Yeah, and as always, I'm here all day. So if you want to geek out with REST, just come and see me. And that's my section.